Thank you so much, Matthew, sir, for writing this book. We all need to read this and get inspired. Now, moving on to our next session. The horrific massacre of the Jallianwala Bagh on 13th April 1919 was a brutal display of colonial power and has been etched in the collective memory of Indians, symbolizing the struggle of independence. To discuss the complex narratives surrounding the Jallianwala Bagh tragedy, I would like to invite on stage Lady Kishwar Desai, an award winning author, playwright, historian, and erstwhile president of Z Telefilms. She has written many popular fiction and non-fiction books, and her book Jallianwala Bagh 1919, The Real Story, has won her critical acclaim and led to exhibitions across India, UK, and New Zealand at the centenary of the massacre. She is the chair of the Arts and Cultural Heritage Trust that set up the world's first partition museum at the historic Town Hall, Amritsar, and now at the Dara Sikh Library at Delhi. Lady Kishwar Desai is well recognized for her work in art, history, and literature, both in the UK and India. Please welcome her with a big round of applause. Thank you, ma'am. Joining her is the prolific and acclaimed author, Mr. Navtej Sarna, whose novel Crimson Spring has won the KLF Award for the Best Fiction Book of 2022 and was longlisted for the Dublin Literary Award. A professional diplomat, for nearly 4 decades, he was India's ambassador to the United States, High Commissioner to the UK, and ambassador to Israel. He has also served as Secretary to the Government of India and as the Foreign Office spokesperson. He's a very well known face on television. They will be in conversation with Ms. Manraj Garewal Sharma, resident editor of the Indian Express at Chandigarh, covering the states of Punjab, Haryana, and Himachal Pradesh. She's the author of Dreams After Darkness, a book on militancy in Punjab. Over to you, ma'am. And please welcome them all with a big round of applause. Thank you so much.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. It's a privilege to be in the company of these two exceptional authors of two outstanding books. So, without much ado, because we are very short of time and they have a lot to say, my first question is to Ms. Kishwar Desai. The premise of your book is that Jallianwala Bagh has always been looked at in isolation as this one incident. The people gathered there came Dyer and he shot at them and they got killed and all of that. So tell me, you have written that it should not be viewed as an incident in isolation, that it was a part of premeditated repression by the British in Punjab.
Yes. Firstly, thanks to everyone who's organized this wonderful festival and giving us this opportunity for being here today to discuss our books, which is something which I really do welcome because as Navtej and I both discovered, we were writing our books independently. I was writing mine for the centenary commemoration of Jallianwala Bagh, and trying to find out, actually, quite by accident, what exactly happened during the 13th of April 1919 on that one particular day. Because I was already working in Amritsar on the partition, setting up of the Partition Museum, I want to tell you about two things that happened during that period. One is I met Mr. Ravi Bhagat, who's not here today, but he's right now, I think, the secretary to the government of Punjab here. But at that time, he was the DC in Amritsar. And when I went to him and I started talking about my own interest in history and trying to find out more about the happenings in Amritsar, he took out this file. It was an amazing experience to see this file, which was dated 1919. It had been kept for all these years. It was not at that time 100 years, because I met him first in 2015, 2016. He took out, it was almost in tatters, but it was the one evidence and the one very carefully collated set of names which gave us exactly the names and ages of the people who were present at Jallianwala Bagh and who had been massacred. From that point onwards, I was fascinated that why has nobody ever looked at this file? And Mr. Bhagat and I discussed it many times, and I tried to get a copy of that file many times, but it seemed that the government was still worried that people would come forward for compensation. So somehow that file, even after maybe, almost 95 years, was still in the DC's office. So that was one piece of evidence that I found. The other two, well, there are actually two, because we decided that we should do, actually around Jallianwala Bagh, go to each and every house and try and find out from them who were the family members, if any, were present, if they had any memories. Of course, many people would have passed on. All of them would have passed on because it's close to 100 years. What was also shocking for me was that none of that family that still lived, if they had any family members that had lived in 1919, nobody could accurately describe anything. All they could say was, and it's all around, it's all around Jallianwala Bagh that we went door to door knocking and saying, किसी को कुछ पता है, कुछ हमें बताइए. ये area है जो actually I thought was a site of conscience. जो इस तरह की चीजें होती हैं, जैसे हम 26/11 की बात कर रहे थे, जब इस तरह का अटैक होता है, इस तरह से लोगों को मारा जाता है, तो ये एक भूमि बन जाती है जिसके बारे में हमें और जानकारी मिलनी चाहिए. ये कैसे हुआ, क्या हुआ, पर उस समय किसी को कुछ याद नहीं था. तो ये दूसरा था. तीसरा, जब हम अपना ही म्यूजियम सेटअप कर रहे थे, which was at the town hall in Amritsar, I was surprised to find photographs. One photograph I found in which it was shown that town hall was completely burnt down in 1919. A large portion of it had been destroyed. That also made me very curious, that I had not known that there was any other incident that had taken place apart from what happened on the 13th of April. So why was Town Hall destroyed? That led me to the British Library. And in the British Library, I was very pleased to see, in a sense that at least at last I could start piecing the story together. I was able to find an album which showed many, many incidents happening all over Punjab. And these were photographs. This is photographic evidence of the various areas that had been destroyed, burnt, all kinds of incidents taking place, etc. So this was photographic evidence of what had happened before 13th April 1919, and the dates were there. 10th of April, 11th of April, 12th. And I'm saying, what? All we hear जो हमारी हिस्ट्री बुक्स में है वो तो सिर्फ 13 अप्रैल की बात करते हैं. ये क्या हुआ था 10, 11, 12 और उसके बाद गुजरांवाला में क्या हुआ, और भी जगहों में, लाहौर में क्या हुआ. And they were whipping posts, there were all kinds of things which were displayed in that album. और फिर उसके बाद जब मैं again in London, when I went to the the London War Museum, there I found General Dyer's, all his uniform is there, his guns are there, everything is there. And in the albums that you can read, I went through many, I found these martial, these military orders which were pasted all over Punjab. So there were whipping orders, there were orders, crawling orders, there were all kinds of strange orders which were all dated 1919. तो जब मैंने ये सब देखा मुझे समझ में आया कि ये तो बहुत बड़ी कहानी है एंड ये कहानी हमें क्यों नहीं बताई गई. इसका साफ जवाब है जो नवतेज को भी पता है, मुझे भी पता है, क्योंकि देयर वाज सेंसरशिप एंड अ लॉट ऑफ द एविडेंस of Jallianwala Bagh was kept suppressed for many years. So even during the independence movement, of course, the British were worried that if this were to come out, there could be sort of riots all over the country, etc. A lot of the things that happened in Punjab. And Punjab was under curfew for well over 3 months, 4 months in certain places. And it was a time of complete repression. So what you're saying is the story goes way beyond Amritsar. It goes way beyond and it covers the whole of undivided Punjab, including bombing in Gujranwala. I mean, आप अपने ही लोगों के ऊपर बॉम्ब फेंक रहे, इसका भी एविडेंस हमें मिला. बहुत सारी चीज़ों का इस तरह से हमें एविडेंस मिला. And that made me want to write this book. And it's a totally factual book. It's a historical narrative. And my mother, who is now 91, God bless her, and my dad, who passed away, who was almost 100, when they both read the book, they said कि हमें भी नहीं ये बातें पता थी. We did not know that all of this happened in Punjab. तो ये narratives जो हैं बहुत ज़रूरी हैं. And I managed to put it together. And it was for me a way of maybe giving back to the people who suffered so much, including my own grandmother who used to live in a few streets away from Jallianwala Bagh. और वो छोटी सी बच्ची थी उस ज़माने में, और उन्होंने क्या देखा होगा, क्या सुना होगा, because people came out crawling covered with blood out of Jallianwala Bagh. बहुत सारी चीज़ें हमें उसके मैसेकर के बारे में पता नहीं थी, मुझे भी नहीं पता थी. जब मैंने रिसर्च शुरू किया तब मुझे ये सब बातें पता चली.
Mr. Sarna, yours is a lovely fiction rooted in reality, right? And so it brings us to the Jallianwala Bagh massacre. But you've also written at the beginning that you wanted to write about World War I, about the massacre, and also the freedom fighters, the revolutionaries. So did it influence the choice of your characters? Because your book is being told through many characters.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you to Literati and the Chandigarh Literary Society for bringing me back here. I was here about 10 years ago for your 2013 session. Great pleasure to be here. And I won't repeat what Kishwar has already said because time is short. But I think from what you have said, Kishwar, in my book, I felt the same, that there was much else happening. So my lens is even wider. It is beyond Jallianwala Bagh, and that's how I come to your question. Because not only was Jallianwala Bagh not a discrete, single, standalone incident, in 1919, there were many others, of course. There was the follow-up from the 10th April and the aftermath of the crawling order and so on and so forth, which we all know. But what struck me was when I wanted to write about the other happenings in Punjab, I thought there were two books. One was a Punjab book about the Gadar and the Singh Sabha movement and the Gurdwara reform movement, and the First World War soldiers coming back, particularly Punjab soldiers, because as you know, Punjab contributed the largest amount to the First World War. 500,000 out of 1.3 million were from Punjab. Then I realized that it is actually the same book. Jallianwala Bagh was a piece of the same landscape that was happening. It was all happening in the 1914 to 1921, 22, 23 period. Everything was happening. So that was the choice of the format of this book, which was historical fiction. It is not history, but it is not historically inaccurate in any which way. I have filled in the gaps with fiction. I've created some fictional characters, and there are some historical characters. And we can talk about that if we get the time. The second thing was you asked about that influenced my choice of the protagonists. Because when I saw the different historical streams, each one of these protagonists plays a role in shedding light on that particular historical stream. For instance, there is a soldier here who comes back from the First World War. And what does he come back to? He comes back to Rowlatt Act and the massacre. And he has gone and fought for the king and crown in very inhospitable conditions in Europe and in Mesopotamia. We have here a Gadar revolutionary who has come and is hiding in Amritsar, and he becomes a part of the Jallianwala Bagh entire episode. So I bring the entire Gadar in through him. So each one of these characters brings with him an entire layer of history that was happening. The focus of the book remains the massacre, but it shows how ordinary lives of people who were not big names, or not just General Dyer and Michael O'Dwyer, who are also do figure tangentially in the book, but how ordinary people's lives were changed by 1919 and the massacre. For instance, there is one of the protagonists is Mehtab Singh, and he is a government worker. He's an irrigation department worker. Through him, you get the entire story of the canal colonies. But after he goes through Jallianwala Bagh, he sees, how his son, who is the soldier, comes out of that, and he himself is taken away by Dyer as a prisoner. He leaves his job, and he becomes an activist of the Gurdwara Reform Movement. Now, the Gurdwara Reform Movement was not just a movement on its own. It was part of the larger non-cooperation of the Gandhis. So when they first got the keys of the Golden Temple from the British-appointed DC-appointed Sarabra of Golden Temple, Mahatma Gandhi sent a telegram saying that you have won the first battle of India's independence. So it was part of a larger scheme. So what my discovery, somewhat like Ishwar's from a different angle, was that there were many pieces happening, and I have tried in this book to bring as much of it as possible, including the revolutionaries.
Hi, Kishore. You've mentioned how, the protest against Rowlatt Act, it was very united, that there was no difference, there was no divisions between the Hindus and the Muslims and the Sikhs, and everyone came together. So tell us about it.
Yes, that was a very vital and key part of what I was researching on, and which is very much part of the Jallianwala Bagh narrative, because the two people who led the revolt against the Rowlatt Act in Amritsar, as you might know, was Saifuddin Kichlu and Satyapal. One was a Hindu, one was a Muslim. And what we discovered when I started doing further research on this, was that this was, again, a wider narrative. It wasn't just restricted to Saifuddin and Satyapal. This went across. It went in from Amritsar to Gujranwala to Lahore. We see this over and over again, that it is a very united front against the British at that time. So we need to look at this historically. Pardon me, ma'am, if, as a gentleman said, you and I are both, in a sense, from London. But what we are doing here is really looking at history and the way history is taught, and the reality that we find when we start doing our research. So this is very important for us to look at, even when we do difficult histories. So what I discovered was that in the Gurdwaras, for example, in the mosques, even in Lahore, the people who were gathered there against the Rowlatt Act were both Hindus and Muslims, and often Sikhs, all together. And there was a Ram Navami procession which was taken out on the 9th of April. And there are such interesting descriptions. The Hindus and Muslims are drinking from the same glass. And why we know this is correct? Because these are police reports. The British had CID officers posted all over the place who were writing in, and they were telling their bosses, these were mostly Indians who were writing in and telling their bosses that, look, you better watch out because the Hindus and the Muslims are getting together and there's going to be a huge revolution. We know it. And why was it happening? Was because they were marching in the Ram Navami procession together, Hindus and Muslims. And similarly, in the mosque in Lahore, they were doing the same thing. They were plotting and planning against the British. So this was a very key part. And that's why when I was doing my research and we were setting up the Partition Museum, and the partition of India comes in 1947, it was shocking to think that how much had changed. You know, from 1919, 1920, when everybody is united, to 1947, when the whole country is ready to be divided. And this is so peculiar because Punjab's story was not that story. So this was something which I found fascinating. Apart from everything else, it goes with all the narratives that we have in the Partition Museum. जो बुजुर्ग लोग हैं, जिनको याद हैं कि लोग कैसे रहते थे, और जैसे हम पहले कह रहे थे कि ये फेस्टिवल की एक खास बात ये भी है कि हम इधर उर्दू में बोलते हैं, हिंदी में बोलते हैं, पंजाबी में बोलते हैं, अंग्रेजी में बोलते हैं, सभी भाषाओं की रिप्रेजेंटेशन है जो पंजाब की भाषाएं हैं. वो सारी भाषाएं और सारी जो जिस तरह के तौर तरीके थे वो मिले जुले तौर तरीके थे. It was a co-mingling that existed at that time, and that was very, for me, very important, a very important takeaway. But I do want to just pick up on the start of why there was this feeling that there was the 13th of April and Jallianwala Bagh happened. And so Dyer just walked in and shot all these people. No. Jallianwala Bagh was already being used for these meetings. It was a space where people met, they protested. The British were well aware of this. Everybody knew about this. So the fact that Dyer came in, and that is why the whole conspiracy theory comes up, that he was specially brought in. Why? Because in the previous days, on the 10th of April, there were 5 British people who were killed in Amritsar. And this was a moment that had never taken place before in Punjab. And they had been killed. Why? Because Gandhi was stopped from entering into Punjab. Satyapal and Saifuddin Kichlu were arrested and taken to the DC's house, the same DC's house that I happened to visit, so many years later. And then they were taken into captivity. People came out on the streets protesting. In the protest, the British mistakenly, there was a DC there who just got extremely nervous. He was young, he had just come in, Irving, and he ordered a shooting on the people. This was on the 10th of April. So this goes completely unrecorded, how that happened. The nervousness then came from the British, and O'Dwyer, who was known for his repressive attitude towards... Now, see, it isn't like it's an all good or all bad story. We do have Montague coming in, the Chelmsford Montague reforms, Montague coming in 1918. And he talks about that how much he is trying to get people to look at giving Indians more power. But he also comments that there is this person called O'Dwyer, who is based in Amritsar, who refuses to look upon Indians, who's based in Lahore, who looks upon Indians as, not capable of handling political power. So it's not all gray, it's not all white, but it is the situation that is coming up almost all over India. And Punjab becomes almost like a place where repression is carried out day to day because the British are nervous that this may be the overthrow of the empire that is being plotted here. And I take your point about the soldiers returning, because they had already seen that they were fighting for democracy abroad. And when they come back, they're facing this repression.
Right. Yes, and actually, I'll wait for your question, but just to, slightly differ on this, actually, a lot of this is recorded. And it's recorded in the Hunter Commission, which is available.
Which I've quoted a lot in my book.
Yeah, of course. But the entire thing of the build-up as well as in the Gandhi Inquiry Committee, you get this connection from the beginning of the Satyagraha. There were incidents in Delhi, there were incidents in Calcutta, and Gandhi was, as you rightly said, stopped. So, there was a lot of tension building up, and essentially Punjab was the focus of this activity. Nowhere else did you have this entire collection of the revolutionary spirit. And Michael O'Dwyer, was the epitome of what has been called the Punjab style of administration. This is a colonial word. I'm sorry, but you asked the question.
No, you've written about it.
Yes.
So you have 2 British protagonists in your book, right?
Out of the 9 protagonists, 2 are British, and I've been asked this question very often, and this I take Kishwar's point entirely, that there was no black or white, a lot of things were gray. So I deliberately chose those 2 British protagonists because I wanted to show, I did not want to use Dyer and O'Dwyer directly. So these 2 are witnesses. One is a witness to Dyer, one is a witness to O'Dwyer. So the witness to Dyer is based on the ADC to Dyer, who was standing behind him when he ordered the shooting. The ADC's name was Sergeant William Anderson. And he left a scrap of a memory. It's just 1 paragraph, which his family then gave it to a writer. And that is available in the library, British Library and other places. I took that scrap of memory and made my Sergeant Nicholas Williams. And that is an entirely fictional, I gave him an entirely fictional life, except for that moment when he is standing behind Dyer. So he becomes the witness to what Dyer said, how the police officers with him reacted. There was one person who tugged at his elbow and said, are we firing? And Dyer pushed him off. There was one police officer who couldn't take it, a British police officer. He left it because he was nauseous at what was happening. So all this comes through William Anderson's, my character of William Anderson's, which is Nicholas Williams. And I realized that William Anderson belonged to the London Cyclists Regiment. So I traced the entire story of the London Cyclists Regiment, how they came, when they came, where all they served, and how this young sergeant happened to be at that critical point. The other British character is the Chief Secretary of Punjab. And my character is called Hugh Potter. Now, he's a witness on Michael O'Dwyer because he is Michael O'Dwyer's senior-most civil servant. So he can tell us how Michael O'Dwyer was acting and reacting. Now, my character is J.P. Thompson was the original Chief Secretary. He was a dyed-in-the-wool imperialist. He had no qualms about what he was doing. But that would not have been an interesting fictional character. So my character, Hugh Potter, is a conflicted man. He is not sure that they are doing the right thing. And it also shows the division of opinion in Britain is also reflected there. Because as you know, Dyer was criticized strongly in the House of Commons and the House of Lords, asking forgiveness from Lady Kishwa. The House of Lords actually allowed him to get away, So this was a divided opinion. So, in fiction, if you have gray characters, they become more interesting than straight black and white characters. So that was the choice.
Tell me, what happened in the aftermath? You've written a lot about the Hunter Commission. Yeah.
So before we come to that, I just also want to add that Gandhi played a very crucial role I think in both our books, because that is the other source of information that we get, because he actually did go around, much like journalists do today, go and get eyewitness accounts of what happened. So we were very fortunate that we have these eyewitness accounts which still exist from 100 years ago, which becomes a source you can go to. What were the kind of people? How were they injured? What exactly happened during that time and what was the impact and the aftermath. So let us say one or two things very quickly. What was the aftermath? When people talk about the aftermath of the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, we often are left thinking that this was a political game, and the aftermath is mainly about how the British managed to circumvent any kind of trouble coming their way. That was done quite simply. Dyer became the fall guy. He, of course, became extremely popular, as we just discussed, in London, in England at that time, because there was money that was accumulated for him, etc., etc. He became quite a hero in certain parts of society that supported the Raj and felt that the Raj was something that needed these kind of guys, teach the Indians a lesson. So there was that kind of thinking that also went on. However, it is a fact that the people of Punjab and the people of Amritsar particularly were devastated, absolutely devastated. You can imagine that Amritsar, and this is the impact I think all of us need to focus on a little more, because all the figures that come to us today indicate that at least 2,000 to 5,000 people were one way or the other impacted by Jallianwala Bagh. That Bagh was crowded. We have only numbers which show around 379, maybe 500, but a lot of eyewitnesses who are quoted in Gandhi's records also speak about, and also in the Hunter Committee report, there are mentions of large crowds, etc., gathering there. So we have that. Amritsar had a very small population. In the city, in the walled city, as you would well know, barely there would have been 1.5 lakh people, who lived there. Most of the people, unlike what all of us have been seeing on screen, etc., etc., most of the people who died in Jallianwala Bagh were men. They were men and they were young children. We've gone through the records many times, all the names, including the DC's file that I mentioned, etc. There were not more than 2 women who were mentioned as having died in Jallianwala Bagh. And why we know that is because their names are mentioned there. Most of the people, again, another myth that was created, that people came by Baisakhi ka Mela, ye wo, rubbish. Most of the people belonged to Amritsar. And that is where that file is very crucial, and so are other eyewitness accounts. So we know that they belong to Amritsar. If a large population of men is massacred overnight, you can imagine what happens to the women and the children, and also other orders that were being passed. People were being jailed all the time. There was a crawling order which prevented men and women going in a certain gully, which you may know was another one of Dyer's inspired moments. He said, he just put a curfew from the morning to the night. Nobody could go into that gully unless they crawled. So, and so people went without food, children died. There is a lot of the impact that till today is not properly recorded. And we also know, because these are people I have spoken to, families I have spoken to, who were forced to leave Amritsar forever because they feared the backlash of the British, because they were confiscating property, they were kind of demolishing homes, they were doing all kinds of things out there to make the population learn a lesson. That was very, very crucial. In Dyer's and O'Dwyer's words, the people of Punjab had to be taught a lesson. So they were being taught a lesson in these cruel. So the impact was to last for generations. It isn't that it was just the impact of the political way in which the British managed to cover up, because the media was not allowed to report. I mean, there was hardly any media stories that were coming out. It wasn't for months later, when curfew was lifted, that people actually found out what happened. Of course, there was a Hunter Committee report, there were other things, but yeah.
And, so Udham Singh was born out, the revolutionary was born out of this Jallianwala Bagh massacre. And it's not, I don't know whether you found out, but some people say Bhagat Singh was all of 10 when he came a day later and he saw the site.
Well, the great revolutionary movement of Punjab, uh, including the Ghadar, was also interrelated with these times. Now, okay, since you've asked a pointed question, I'll try to give a pointed answer. There's so much more to say to what Kishwar has said, but I will not waste time. She's already covered a lot of ground. So, the Ghadarites had this very young, inspirational revolutionary, Kartar Singh Saraba, who was a student in Berkeley. He was not some guy looking for heroism. He came out of genuine patriotism to India, was hanged for Ghadar conspiracy. Bhagat Singh took Kartar Singh Saraba as his hero. And it is said that Bhagat Singh, when he came of age, or not, he never, just 10 or 11 years ago, he did go to Jallianwala Bagh and he swore on the soil that he would, fight for the country's freedom. I don't know, I haven't seen anything more than stories about this. There's no evidence. The third man was Udham Singh, who treated Bhagat Singh as his guru. And this is recorded. And it's Udham Singh is the most shadowy character in this book because he was an expert. He had trained himself to live like a shadow. He had multiple identities, multiple passports, multiple names. He was Udham Singh, he was Uday Singh, he was Sher Singh, he was Frank Brazil, he was Ram Mohammed Singh, which was tattooed on his arm. He was everything to everybody. But that was the man. So he treated Bhagat Singh as his guru. He kept a photograph of it in his pocket and was seen, dancing like a darwish. And that scene is described here with Bhagat Singh as his guru. I will. But so Udham Singh, this only one point I want to make. There is so much, the difference between history, historical fiction, movies. There is no evidence that Udham Singh was in Jallianwala Bagh. I can say confidently, I've gone through every scrap of paper on Udham Singh. I have a cupboard full of Udham Singh, but there is no evidence that he was there. Yet you see a movie which has been a big success, in which not only is Udham Singh there, but he sort of single-handedly picks up all the wounded and takes them to hospital on a ready. I mean, you got to be joking.
And they never did take them. There were no hospitals.
They were not allowed to take them. They died on the lanes. They died where they lay down. Udham Singh, in fact, in my book, he is not in Jallianwala Bagh. He is in East Africa. And I have the evidence of his trial. When just before he was sentenced, after he was sentenced to death, he says, I don't know who was the governor. I mean, he was facing death. And they asked him, he said, I don't know who was the governor of Punjab, I was in East Africa. Now, he had no reason to lie at that moment. In fact, if he had said, yes, I was there and I want revenge, then of course. So if you want, I can read out Udham Singh. Should I read out? Okay, I'll read out just the last bit.
Yeah, I think so. We started a little late, so I guess we do have.
Now, I've used Udham Singh's, there isn't much to go by on his life, except his trial, his letters, and the memories of his companions or the descendants of his companions. So I've used all those to create a diary of Udham Singh, in which is the only protagonist here who speaks in his own voice. So I'm going to just use the last scene was in Pentonville Prison in London. I actually went and visited Pentonville Prison. I went to the room where he was hung, and his body was dropped down, and his body was removed and buried in a little patch, unmarked grave. There was a patch where everybody who was hung there used to be buried there in layers. And for 34 years, his body lay there until we decided as Government of India in 1974, based on the Government of Punjab's recommendations, that we get his remains back. and then they were taken out, brought back here, and given all the due honors. So this is from his diary in Pentonville Prison. My days are coming to an end. I can feel it in the way the warders treat me now. They are even gentle when they force the pipe down my throat if I don't take my meal tray. They are more patient, as if they are saying to themselves, it's only a matter of a few days more. I walk every hour in the yard with its high walls. The open sky is blue and clear. It's very beautiful, and at times I feel I have not looked at simple things enough in my life. The blue sky, or the green leaves, or the pretty birds. There was never any time. There was always so much that had to be done. And 5 days later, hangings are all the same. I have seen many hanged when I was in prison in India. I have always thought I would be happiest if I met this sort of death. It takes only 2 minutes and off she goes. In this country, hangmen are white-faced, nice-looking, kind-hearted, but they take life just the same. Their Lord Jesus was hanged from a cross with nails in his hands and feet, so I say only the good get away with that death. These white-faced hangmen will come quietly on the morning that is selected by the High Sheriff for prisoner 6828. I have seen the steps by which they will come. Metal steps covered with a rubber mat, so I won't hear their footsteps and become difficult. But I am prepared. My prayer books have helped me to prepare myself. The warders have told me that the hanging will be right here, next door. And there is a patch of land in the prison where I will be buried with all the other brave revolutionaries. And on 31st of July, 1940, this is the morning that I've been waiting for. I'm dressed in civilian clothes for the first time in the past 2 weeks. The priest has been with me for an hour. He has been talking to me of the God that awaits me on the other side of this journey. But I'm only waiting to see Bhagat. They are now at the door. I didn't hear them come. The rubber covering on the steps took care of that. The door opens. There are several of them, but there is only one man who is looking me in the eye. He must be the hangman. Hold out your arms, he says, and I stretch them forward. I feel nothing, only a very deep calm. He quickly pulls my arms behind my back and ties them at the wrist. The leather of the strap is soft and gentle. They have moved the wardrobe in the room, and behind it is a green metal door. It opens, and I can see the rope in the next room. This is the rope to which I am to be wed. Come with me, lad, you'll be all right, says the hangman, and leads me into the other room. I feel the warders gently holding my elbows as I step forward. They don't push me. They don't need to. There is a line made with chalk under the rope before which they make me stand. Another man ties my ankles together with a leather strap. I see the others in the room standing in line looking at me. The hangman is in front of me. He whips out a white handkerchief from his pocket. No, it's a white sack that he opens out. The sack is over my head, even as the priest is saying the prayers. I see nothing more. I feel the noose around my neck, loose at first and then tight. Then the ground opens under my feet. I have become immortal. I have become one with Bhagat Singh.
I think, I'm sorry, we seem to have run short of time, but do we have enough for question answers from the audience? No? Okay. Thank you so much for listening in, and thank you so much to the authors. It was wonderful listening to both of you. And please go and pick up the books. They're brilliant, completely outstanding.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thanks.
बहुत बहुत आभार किशोर देसाई जी, नवतेज सारना जी.